The summer afternoon had burned itself thin by the time the sun began to fall. Out on the frontier, heat didn't fade gently. It retreated in grudging steps, leaving dust in the air and a dull ache in the bones. The forge had been alive since dawn. Iron rang against iron. Sparks leapt and died, and the bellows breathed like a tired animal that refused to quit. The blacksmith worked alone. He always did. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, forearms darkened by soot and old scars. Sweat traced slow lines down his back as he set the final piece aside and quenched it in water. Steam hissed, sharp and sudden. The sound echoed against the low hills and drifted toward the narrow strip of land that separated his place from the one beside it. That strip had never felt small. It was a boundary most folks understood without needing it spelled out. On one side stood the forge, wood, iron, smoke, and a man who kept to himself. On the other, a patch of earth where a young Apache woman lived alone, neither fully claimed by the tribe nor welcomed by the town. They were neighbors by distance only. As the sun lowered, the noise of the forge quieted. The blacksmith wiped his hands on a rag and turned toward the doorway, ready to step into the dim calm of his cabin. That was when he heard it, a voice, soft, barely more than breath. "I wish someone would choose to stay." The words drifted across the fence as lightly as ash, carried by the evening wind. They were not meant for him. They were not meant for anyone. And yet they struck him with a weight that stopped his hand on the doorframe. He stood still. Beyond the fence, the Apache woman sat alone by a small cooking fire. Its flame was low, careful, as if she feared drawing attention. Her dark hair hung loose down her back, catching the last copper light of day. She was turned toward the town in the distance, toward the laughter, the voices, the sounds of people who belonged somewhere without having to fight for it. From where he stood, the blacksmith could see the glow of lanterns beginning to rise along the main road. Families gathering, couples walking close, doors opening to welcome others in. She remained where she was. The words she had spoken hung in the air, fragile and exposed. They were not dramatic, not angry, just honest in a way most people avoided. He could have gone inside. That would have been the sensible thing, the safe thing. Pretend he hadn't heard. Let the fence remain what it had always been, a quiet agreement not to cross lines that brought trouble with him. He had lived most of his life by that rule. But something in her voice, thin with longing, stripped of pride, reached into a place he'd spent years locking away. He knew that sound. He had heard it in himself once, long before he learned how to bury it under work and solitude. Slowly he stepped out of the shadow of the forge. The light touched him then, revealing a man who looked older than his years, shaped by labor and silence. He walked toward the fence, boots crunching softly against the dirt. Not fast, not eager, just present. She sensed movement and turned, startled, her hand tightening around a cup she hadn't realized she was holding. For a moment, neither spoke. The fence stood between them, weathered wood, waist-high, unremarkable. Yet it carried the weight of unspoken history, of bloodlines and judgments and fear. "Evening," he said at last, keeping his voice steady. She studied him, cautious but not hostile. "Evening." The town's distant noise drifted between them, filling the pause. He did not mention what he had heard, did not ask questions. He only nodded toward the dying sun. "Heat's easing," he said. "A little," she replied. Silence returned, but it no longer felt empty. It felt shared. He leaned one hand against the fence, not crossing it. Not yet. She watched the gesture closely, as if measuring his intent. The fire beside her crackled once, then settled. "I didn't mean for anyone to hear that," she said quietly. "I know," he answered. Another pause. Longer this time. He could feel it then. Not attraction, not hope, but recognition. The kind that came from seeing someone else stand where you had once stood yourself. Alone, unchosen, waiting without knowing for what. "I'm not good at fixing things that aren't made of iron," he said after a moment. "But no one deserves to sit with that kind of wish by themselves." Her eyes lifted to his. There was surprise there, and something else. Not trust, not yet, but curiosity. The sun slipped below the horizon, and the first stars appeared. Between the forge and the fire, between two lives shaped by edges and absence, the fence remained. For now. This was not love. Not even the promise of it. It was something quieter. It was the moment one person chose not to turn away. In the days that followed, nothing outwardly changed, and yet everything had. The fence remained where it was, its boards warped by sun and time. The forge still woke with the light, iron ringing sharp against the morning air. The small fire on the neighboring land still burned low each evening, careful and contained. From a distance, it would have looked like two lives continuing on separate paths. But now there was awareness. The Apache woman no longer felt like a shadow at the edge of his vision. And the blacksmith was no longer just smoke and sound to her, a presence heard but never acknowledged. They had spoken briefly. That alone shifted the ground beneath both their feet. She lived between worlds, too far from the heart of the Apache camp to be claimed, yet too close to the town to be ignored. Some days she traveled toward the hills, gathering roots and leaves the way her mother had taught her. Other days she stayed near her small dwelling, repairing what she could, surviving quietly. Neither side fully trusted her place, and she had learned not to ask for trust she was unlikely to receive. Belonging, she knew, was a fragile thing. The blacksmith understood that fragility more than most. Once he had been part of the town. He had stood shoulder to shoulder with other men, believed in laws written by people who never bled for them. He had heard gunfire echo through narrow streets and watched order collapse into fear when it mattered most. When the shouting stopped, he left. Not in anger, but in certainty. Some things were better forged alone. Now he lived by rhythm instead of rules. Fire, iron, water. Work that demanded honesty. Metal never lied. It bent or it broke. There was comfort in that. Their next conversation happened 3 mornings later. He was hauling water from the well when he noticed her there already, crouched low, her movements precise and efficient. She looked up when she sensed him, eyes alert but calm. "Mornin'," he said. "Mornin'," she answered. That was all. They drew water in silence, the bucket creaking as it rose, the rope rough against their palms. The air smelled of dust and sage. Somewhere a hawk cried out. When she finished, she stepped aside without comment, allowing him space. He nodded once in thanks. That became the pattern. Short exchanges, careful distance. No questions that reached too far, no explanations offered or demanded. They spoke of the weather, of the heat, of the way the wind had shifted, nothing more. And somehow that restraint mattered. In the frontier, words could be weapons. Questions could cut deeper than knives. Both of them knew this. Both had paid for speaking too freely once. Some evenings he would see her tending her fire while he cooled the forge. Other nights she watched sparks climb into the dark as he worked late. They did not wave. They did not linger. But neither turned away. Silence grew familiar, then comfortable. One afternoon, as the sun hung heavy and unforgiving, he noticed her struggling with a bundle of wood too large for her frame. She set it down, frustration tightening her jaw. He hesitated, one hand resting against the forge door. He could offer help. He could also mind his business. She sensed him watching and met his gaze, unreadable. The moment stretched. Then she adjusted her grip and tried again. The bundle shifted, nearly toppling her. Before she could fall, he moved. Quick, instinctive. He steadied the wood without a word, setting it upright. Their hands brushed for the briefest instant. She stiffened, then relaxed when he stepped back. "Thank you," she said, quiet but clear. He inclined his head. "Anytime." No questions followed, no explanations. That night, the fire on her land burned a little brighter. Over the next weeks, their awareness of each other sharpened. Not into longing, not yet, but into recognition. Two people who had chosen the margins, not because they wanted to be alone, but because it was safer than being misunderstood. She noticed the scars on his arms. Old, deliberate, earned. He noticed the way she scanned the horizon before sitting, the way she positioned herself with instinctive caution. Neither asked why. They did not speak of the tribe. They did not speak of the town. They did not speak of the past. What passed between them was something quieter and rarer. Permission to exist without explanation. Some nights, as the stars thickened overhead, she wondered what had driven him away from the world he'd left behind. Other nights, he wondered what line she had crossed to end up standing alone between two unforgiving sides. But wondering was not asking. And asking, they both understood, could wait. For now it was enough to know that when the day ended, when the forge cooled and the fire settled, there was another soul nearby who understood what it meant to live on the edge and choose not to run from it. They were not together. They were not alone. They were two people standing at the borders of their lives, learning slowly that the edge did not always mean falling. Morning came early on the frontier, whether a person was ready for it or not. The well sat between the forge and the scrubland like a neutral ground. Old stone, worn smooth by generations of hands that had come seeking the same thing. Water did not care who you were or where you belonged. It only asked that you pull the rope and meet its weight honestly. They began crossing paths there without planning it. Some mornings the blacksmith arrived first. Sleeves rolled, muscles already warm from work started before sunrise. Other mornings she was there ahead of him, crouched low, hair tied back, her attention focused on the slow rise of the bucket. Neither greeted the other loudly, a nod, a quiet word. Enough. At first they filled their buckets and left. Then one morning the rope snagged, twisting hard against the stone lip. She frowned, tugging again, irritation flashing across her face. Before she could say anything, he stepped closer and loosened the rope with practiced ease. Stones shifted, he said. Happens after dry spells. She watched his hands as he worked. Steady, deliberate, respectful of force. Everything breaks eventually, she said. Only if you rush it, he replied. That made her smile. Just barely. From then on, the morning stretched. They lingered a few breaths longer after drawing water. Sometimes they leaned against the well's edge, the cool stone a relief from the rising heat. The land woke around them, birds calling, insects humming, the wind moving through dry grass with a whisper like breath through teeth. She was the first to speak of things that mattered. She told him about plants most people overlooked, how a leaf's edge could tell you if it healed or harmed, how certain roots eased fever while others deepened it. She spoke of reading the wind, not just its direction, but its mood, when it carried dust, when it carried rain, when it warned of change. Wind never lies, she said one morning. People do. He nodded. Iron doesn't lie either. That was how he began to talk. He told her about metal, how it remembered every strike, every flame it had known, how heat softened what force alone could not, how pushing too hard shattered even the strongest steel. You don't fight iron, he said. You listen to it. Bend it when it's ready. Let it cool when it needs to. She considered that, eyes thoughtful. Sounds like people, she said. Most things do, he answered. They never sat close. Not at first. Space remained between them, measured and intentional. But time, like water, had a way of wearing distance down. She spoke one morning of nights she couldn't sleep, of lying awake, listening to the land breathe, feeling caught between two worlds that both refused to claim her. She did not ask for comfort. She only stated it, the way one states weather. I stand in the middle, she said, and the middle doesn't belong to anyone. He did not tell her she belonged somewhere. He did not offer easy reassurances. Instead, he said, edges are where things change. That stayed with her. As days passed, she lingered longer by the well. Sometimes she sat on the low stone rim, cradling her cup, watching the first sparks rise from the forge in the distance. Sometimes she stayed until the sun climbed higher than usual, until the heat demanded movement. And without realizing when it began, the blacksmith started leaving the forge door open longer in the mornings. Not for air, for the chance she might still be there. They never named what was happening. There were no promises, no glances heavy with meaning, just an unspoken rhythm that settled between them. The quiet understanding that the well was more than a place to draw water, it was where they met the day together. Some mornings they spoke little. Other mornings words flowed easily, circling work and land, and the small truths that filled the spaces between larger ones. When they parted, it was without ceremony, yet each carried the other into the rest of the day. She found herself timing her steps, hoping not to miss him. He found himself listening for the sound of her bucket against stone. No one would have called it courtship. The frontier had no patience for such softness. But both of them knew the difference between habit and choice. And somewhere between the rising sun and the cool draw of the well, between iron and root, between silence and speech, they began, without saying it aloud, to wait for each other. It happened on a day that did not announce itself as important. The sky was pale and unforgiving, the kind of washed-out blue that promised heat but delivered no comfort. The blacksmith had been working since early morning, hammer rising and falling in a steady rhythm that matched his breathing. Sparks climbed and vanished. The forge sang the only song he trusted. He heard the sound before he saw it, a sharp crack, followed by silence. When he looked up, he saw her standing near her shelter, holding the broken handle of a cooking pot. The metal had split clean where years of use had weakened it. She stared at it for a long moment, jaw tight, weighing her options. There were not many. She could carry it into town and endure the looks, or she could do without. Pride and survival often pulled in opposite directions out here. He watched from the edge of his forge, saying nothing. At first, she knelt, trying to fit the pieces together herself, fingers working carefully, stubbornly. It was the kind of effort born not from hope, but refusal to ask. When it failed, she set the pot aside and sat back on her heels, shoulders slumping just slightly. That was when he moved. He crossed the distance slowly, aware of every step. The boundary between their lands was not marked by much, just a worn strip of dirt, a shallow ditch. The kind of line people agreed not to notice while never forgetting it was there. He stepped over it anyway. The moment his boot touched her side of the ground, she looked up sharply. Fear flashed across her face, not of him, but of the choice he had just made. "You shouldn't," she said. "I know," he replied. He did not apologize. He did not justify himself. He simply crouched beside the pot and examined the break, fingers gentle, respectful. "It's an easy fix," he said. "Won't take long." "That's not what I meant." Her voice dropped. "You don't cross that line." He met her eyes then, steady and calm. "Things break," he said. "Leaving them broken doesn't protect anyone." She swallowed. The wind shifted, carrying the distant sounds of the town. Voices, movement, life continuing as it always had. "You don't understand what this could bring on you." "I understand enough," he said. He took the pot back to the forge without waiting for permission. The repair itself was simple. He heated the metal slowly, coaxing it back to shape, reinforcing the weak point without forcing it. She stood at a distance, arms crossed tightly, watching every movement. Not because she doubted his skill, but because she knew what skill did not protect against. When he finished, he handed it back without ceremony. "It'll hold," he said. Her fingers closed around the handle. "You didn't have to do that." "No," he agreed. "I chose to." That night, her fire burned low and restless. The next morning, things felt different. Not between them, but around them. In town, eyes lingered a moment too long when he passed. Conversations paused when he entered a room. A man he'd known for years spat into the dust and said, "Careful where you put your hands these days," with a smile that held no humor. At the well, someone muttered, "He's asking for trouble." He said nothing. From her side of the land, she noticed movement where there had been none before. Tracks in the dirt. Smoke on the horizon that did not belong to settlers. The quiet sense of being watched returned, heavy and familiar. The Apache were aware now. She came to him that evening, her steps urgent but controlled. "You need to stay away," she said. "From me, from my land." He listened without interrupting. "They won't see it as kindness," she continued. "They'll see it as interference, as ownership, as disrespect." "I didn't take anything," he said. "That won't matter." She was right. Out here, perception often mattered more than truth. He looked past her, toward the fading light, toward the land that had taken more from both of them than it had ever given. "If fixing a pot is enough to start a war," he said quietly, then the ground was already cracked. Her eyes filled with something close to pain. "I won't let you be hurt because of me." "You didn't ask me to cross that line," he said, "but I won't pretend it isn't there anymore." They stood in silence, the space between them charged with things neither could name. From that day on, whispers followed them both, and in the distance shadows gathered, unmoving, patient, waiting. The line had been crossed, and nothing would return to how it was. The warrior arrived at dusk. He did not come riding hard or shouting warnings. He came the way Apache messengers always had, quiet, deliberate, as if the land itself had agreed to carry him. By the time the sun slid low and painted the hills in rust and gold, his horse was already tied beyond the line of her shelter, waiting with patient stillness. She knew who he was before he spoke. He stood straight, his posture shaped by discipline and long memory. His hair was bound neatly, his clothing worn but clean, marked with symbols that spoke of belonging and duty. When he met her eyes, there was no anger there, only certainty. "They know where you are," he said. She nodded. "I figured they would." "The elders have spoken," he continued. "They have not forgotten you." That, more than anything, tightened her chest. He did not threaten. He did not plead. He only delivered what he had been sent to deliver. "You may return," he said. "You will be protected. You will have a place. A husband will be chosen. Your days will follow the law of our people again." The words were measured, familiar, heavy with tradition. She looked past him, toward the forge in the distance. Smoke rose steadily into the evening sky, dark against the fading light. "And if I don't?" she asked. The warrior's gaze followed hers briefly before returning to her face. "Then you remain what you are now," he said. "Between, without protection, without standing. You know what that means." She did. It meant eyes watching from the hills. It meant danger that did not announce itself. It meant being blamed when trouble came, no matter where it started. It meant living without a shield. "I'll give you time," the warrior said, "but not much." He mounted his horse and left without another word, his silhouette dissolving into the lengthening shadows. She stood alone long after he was gone. That night, the fire beside her shelter burned higher than usual, fed by restless hands. The wind shifted, carrying the forge's familiar sounds. Metal meeting metal, steady and unafraid. She listened until the rhythm settled her breathing, then rose and walked toward the boundary she had sworn she would not cross again. The blacksmith was cooling a piece when he saw her approach. He straightened, wiping his hands, already knowing this was not a casual visit. "They came," she said. He nodded. "I figured they would." She told him everything. The offer, the protection, the life laid out like a road already cleared. She spoke without drama, but her voice tightened when she said the final part. "I would have to cut all ties," she said. "No contact, no return." He listened, fully, without interrupting. For a moment she wondered if he would argue, if he would say something noble or reckless or cruel, if he would try to claim her choice as his own. He did none of those things. Instead, he asked one question. "Whose law do you want to live by?" The words were quiet, not a challenge, not a plea, a truth. She stared at him, startled by the simplicity of it. No promises, no warnings, no hidden demand beneath the surface. "My people's law keeps me safe," she said slowly, "but it decides everything for me." "And staying here?" he asked. "Staying here makes me a target," she said. "To them, to the town, to everyone." He leaned back against the forge, the fire casting long shadows across his face. "Safety isn't the same thing as living," he said, "and freedom isn't free." She laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You make it sound easy." "I don't," he replied. "I make it honest." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of the forge on her skin. "If I stay," she said, "you'll be marked too. They won't separate us." "I've been marked before," he said. "I survived." That was not reassurance. It was fact. She turned away, her gaze fixed on the darkening land. "If I go back," she said, "I will belong again. But I won't be myself." "And if you stay?" he asked. "I might lose everything," she said, "including you." He did not flinch. "I won't leave because you're afraid," he said gently, "but I won't ask you to stay either." Silence settled between them, thick and heavy. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried out, its call long and lonely. "I need time," she said. "You have it," he answered. She left as quietly as she had come, carrying the weight of two worlds on her shoulders. Behind her, the forge fire burned steady and patient, as it always had. He arrived in the early afternoon, when the heat pressed down hard enough to make the land feel restless. The blacksmith noticed the horse first, a strong animal, well cared for, standing with the quiet confidence of one that had been ridden long and often. Then he saw the man who rode it, Apache, tall, broad-shouldered. His posture carried authority that did not need to be announced. This was not a messenger. This was someone who expected to be recognized. The man dismounted without haste and walked toward the forge, eyes sharp, measuring. He wore the marks of honor openly, braided cord at his wrist, a knife at his side, the calm certainty of someone who had never doubted where he stood in the world. "You're the blacksmith," the man said. "I am," he answered. The stranger nodded once. "I knew you would be." The blacksmith set his hammer down slowly. The forge fire hissed behind him, restless at the interruption. "What do you want?" The man's gaze flicked past him, toward the land beyond the boundary. "I came to see what kind of place she's chosen." The words landed like a challenge. "She didn't choose a place," the blacksmith said evenly. "She chose to stay." The man's jaw tightened. "She was promised once. To me." That, too, the blacksmith had already known. The man stepped closer, not threatening, but deliberate. "I bring protection. Standing. A life where she won't have to look over her shoulder every day." He paused, then asked the question that carried weight among men who believed the world could be settled by strength alone. "Why should she stay here?" The forge crackled. The blacksmith did not answer. He understood what the other man did not. This was not a contest to be won by words or force. Any answer he gave would turn her life into a prize passed between men. He would not do that to her. The silence stretched. The Apache man studied him, irritation flashing beneath his controlled exterior. "You think your silence makes you noble?" he asked. "No," the blacksmith said. "I think it keeps me out of a choice that isn't mine." For the first time, uncertainty crossed the other man's face. From the edge of her land, she watched them. Her chest tightened with every second they stood there, two worlds colliding in the open air. She recognized the man instantly, the familiar set of his shoulders, the memory of a life once laid out for her in careful lines. He represented everything she had been told was right: safety, certainty, belonging. And standing between him and the blacksmith, she saw what could be lost. The Apache man turned then, finally acknowledging her presence. "You don't have to live like this," he said, "exposed, unprotected. You were meant for more than scraps at the edge of someone else's land." Her fingers curled into her palms. "This isn't scraps." "Then what is it?" he challenged. Before she could answer, the blacksmith spoke, not to the man, but to her. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," he said. The Apache man's eyes narrowed. "You're willing to let her put a target on your back?" The blacksmith met his gaze. "I'm willing to let her choose." That was the moment the tension shifted. The Apache man exhaled slowly, as if weighing a battle he could not fight without losing something he did not yet understand. "Think carefully," he said to her. "The land remembers every choice." He mounted his horse and rode away without another word. The dust had barely settled before the fear crept in. That evening, she came to the forge as the light faded, her steps uncertain. "He won't stop," she said. "Neither will the elders." "I know," he replied. Her voice dropped. "You had a quiet life. I see it. The town may not like you, but they leave you alone. If I stay, they won't anymore. Neither side will." He leaned against the forge door, the fire's glow cutting deep lines across his face. "Quiet doesn't mean untouched," he said. "It just means the trouble hasn't found you yet." "That's not what I mean," she said sharply, then softened. "I don't want to be the reason your peace ends." He stepped closer, stopping short of the boundary. "Peace built on avoiding people isn't peace," he said. "It's just delay." She shook her head, frustration breaking through fear. "You don't understand what they'll do." "I understand enough," he said. "I also understand that pushing you away won't make the danger disappear." Silence fell between them again, heavier than before. That night she did not sleep. She lay awake, listening to the land breathe, to the distant forge cooling, to the echo of a past that refused to stay buried. For the first time, the thought took shape fully and terrified her. "If I stay, I will destroy the only good thing he has." And for the first time since she had chosen the edge, she wondered if leaving might be the kinder act, even if it meant losing herself in the process. The change did not come all at once. It arrived quietly, the way frost creeps across the ground before anyone notices the cold. She stopped coming to the well at dawn. When she did appear, it was later, when the sun was already high and the day had claimed its heat. She no longer lingered, no longer sat on the stone rim with her cup cradled in both hands. She drew her water quickly and left without looking toward the forge. Her fire burned lower at night. Some evenings it did not burn at all. The blacksmith noticed every absence. He noticed the way the land felt emptier, even though nothing physical had changed. He noticed how his ears kept listening for the soft sound of her steps that never came, how his hands paused mid-motion, waiting for a presence that no longer hovered at the edge of his awareness. She had not said goodbye. She had not said anything at all. When they crossed paths, which became rare, she kept her distance. Her replies were short, polite, closed. The warmth that had once lived between words was gone, replaced by careful restraint. She was building walls again. He understood why. Fear had found her the same way it always did, whispering that connection was dangerous, that closeness invited loss, that her presence brought trouble, and the only way to keep him safe was to disappear from his life before someone else decided for her. The old instincts had returned. He did not chase her. He did not cross the boundary uninvited or demand answers she was not ready to give. He did not call her name across the land or follow her into silence. Instead, he stayed. Each morning, the forge came alive as it always had. He worked with steady hands, mending broken tools, shaping iron that others had given up on. When people came, townsfolk who still needed hinges, wagon parts, horseshoes, he did the work without comment. He asked for fair payment and offered no opinions. The forge door remained open, not as an invitation shouted into the world, but as a quiet truth. Nothing here was locked. When a farmer's plow cracked clean through, he repaired it. When a child's knife snapped at the handle, he reforged it stronger. He treated each broken thing with the same patience he always had, as if proving, to himself more than anyone, that not everything shattered beyond saving. Some evenings, as the sun slipped down and the land cooled, he left the forge lit longer than necessary. He sat on the worn bench outside, wiping his hands on a rag, letting the fire breathe behind him. If she came, she would find the door open. If she didn't, the fire would still burn until it was time to let it rest. She watched him from a distance, from the shadow of her shelter, from the edge of the hills, from behind the safety of space she had reclaimed. Each time she saw the forge glowing against the dark, guilt tightened her chest. He was paying for her choices. The town's looks had sharpened. The murmurs had not faded. She had seen men glance toward the forge and then toward her land, connecting things in ways that never ended well. She had seen movement on the ridgelines again, too still to be coincidence. The danger was real, and so was her fear that she was the spark. Better to be cold, she told herself. Better to be distant than to drag him into a fight he never asked for. Better to lose something precious than to watch it be destroyed because of her. Still, the silence hurt more than she had expected. At night, sleep refused to come easily. She lay awake listening to the land, the wind in the grass, the distant call of animals, the soft creak of her shelter settling. Sometimes she thought she heard the forge fire breathing, steady and patient, and it made her chest ache. He did not move toward her, and somehow that mattered more than if he had. He did not accuse, did not demand, did not try to fix what she had broken by retreating. He respected the wall she had rebuilt, even knowing it was made of fear. That restraint became its own kind of presence. Weeks passed like this. The edge between them grew quieter, but it did not feel empty. It felt held, like a pause rather than an ending. One afternoon, he repaired a pot for a woman from town who could barely meet his eyes. When he handed it back, he said, "It'll hold," the same words he had once spoken to her. The echo lingered. She heard about it later from someone else and felt the words settle inside her, heavy with meaning. He was still the same man, still choosing not to turn away, still letting things be repaired instead of discarded. And though she had stepped back, though she had raised the walls high again, she could not silence the truth that followed her through every quiet hour. He had stayed, not because she asked him to, not because he expected her to return, but because staying was who he was. And for the first time since she had begun pulling away, she wondered, not with fear, but with something closer to hope, whether walls built to protect might also be the things that kept her trapped. The forge fire burned on, waiting. The danger did not arrive with gunfire or shouting. It came the way it usually did on the frontier, quietly, deliberately, wrapped in uncertainty. She noticed it first in the way the land went still. No birds at dawn, no wind stirring the grass. Even the insects seemed to retreat, as if they knew better than to announce themselves. The air carried a tension that settled deep in the chest and refused to leave. Tracks appeared near her shelter one morning, fresh, careful, not meant to be seen. She erased them without ceremony and said nothing to anyone. But the town noticed. An older woman was the first to speak. She lived at the edge of the settlement, a widow whose name people only remembered when they needed help stitching wounds or setting bones. One afternoon, she appeared near the well with a basket of dried bread and salt. "You'll want this," she said, placing it beside the Apache woman without looking directly at her. "For what?" she asked. The woman shrugged. "For staying." That was all. A few days later, two children lingered near her land, pretending to chase a stick while keeping a careful eye on the ridge. When she asked them what they were doing, they shrugged in the way children did when they knew more than they were willing to say. "Just watching," one of them replied. She began to understand. A man from town, thin, quiet, rarely noticed, left a bundle of firewood near her shelter one evening. He did not knock. He did not announce himself. By the time she stepped outside, he was already halfway down the path, moving with the urgency of someone who did not want thanks. No one declared loyalty. No one spoke of sides. They simply showed up. The blacksmith saw it too. He noticed how people lingered longer near the forge, how conversations grew softer when her name was mentioned. Not cruel, not curious, just cautious in a new way. He repaired a wagon wheel for an elderly couple one morning, and when he handed it back, the woman leaned close and said, "You're not alone out here." He nodded, understanding more than she realized. The Apache woman felt the shift most clearly at night. The darkness no longer pressed in so tightly. A lamp burned in a nearby window longer than usual. Footsteps passed near her shelter, unhurried, deliberate, not threatening, protective. She had spent so long believing that safety only came from blood ties or written laws that she had forgotten something simpler. Belonging could be built. It did not require ceremonies or approval. It required presence. It required people willing to stand still when walking away would have been easier. One evening, as she gathered water later than usual, the widow joined her at the well. They worked side by side in silence until the bucket rose heavy and full. "You don't owe anyone anything," the woman said finally, "but you don't have to carry it alone either." The words settled into her like warm stones. That night, she watched the forge fire glow against the dark, steady and patient as it always had been. For the first time in weeks, she walked closer. Not all the way, just enough to feel the heat on her skin. The blacksmith noticed but said nothing. He never did when it mattered most. The real test came a week later. Movement on the hills. Shadows where there should have been none. The town felt it. The way animals felt storms before they broke. Doors closed earlier. Windows stayed lit. And yet, no one ran her off. No one demanded she leave to keep the peace. Instead, people stayed awake. Someone fired up a lantern near her shelter. Someone else sat on a porch with a rifle resting casually against the rail. Not aimed, not threatening, just present. The blacksmith kept his forge lit long past midnight, hammering steadily, the sound carrying across the land like a heartbeat. She stood at the edge of her ground, fear curling tight inside her chest, and realized something that stopped her cold. They were staying because she was here, not because she belonged to them, but because they had chosen her. The danger passed without confrontation, slipping back into the hills the way it had come. No victory, no triumph, just the quiet return of night. She sank onto the ground afterward, hands trembling, the weight of what had happened settling slowly. Belonging, she realized, was not where you were born. It was where people chose to stand beside you when it would have been easier not to. The next morning, she went to the well at dawn. The blacksmith was already there. She met his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she did not look away. "I didn't know," she said softly. He nodded. "Most people don't, not until it happens." She stayed longer that morning, long enough to feel the day begin properly, long enough to let the silence between them soften again. A small community had formed, not by law, not by force, but by choice. And for the first time since she had left everything she knew behind, she felt the ground beneath her feet steady. Not safe, but held. The afternoon came without warning. No wind stirred the grass. No birds cried out from the trees. The land held its breath, suspended in a stillness so complete it felt deliberate. The kind of quiet that made every sound, every step matter. The blacksmith was at the forge, working slower than usual, letting the heat do most of the labor. The fire glowed steady, controlled, no longer angry. He had learned that forcing things only led to cracks you couldn't see until it was too late. That was when he sensed her. Not heard, not saw, just knew. He looked up as she crossed the open ground toward the forge. No hesitation this time. No stopping at the edge. Her steps were measured but sure, her posture straight despite the weight she carried. The sun caught in her dark hair, turning it briefly copper before it slipped behind her again. She stopped a few feet from the boundary. The fence stood between them as it always had. Weathered boards, worn nails, unremarkable to anyone else. To them, it had been everything. He did not speak. Neither did she. For a long moment, they stood there with the forge fire breathing behind him and the open land stretching out behind her. Everything they had avoided saying pressed in close, waiting to be acknowledged. Finally, she broke the silence. "If your door is still open." That was all she said. No apology, no explanation, no defense of her distance or justification for her fear. Just a quiet question shaped like an offering. He felt it settle deep in his chest. He set his hammer down carefully, the metal ringing once before falling silent. Then he walked to the fence, not stopping this time, not hesitating. He knelt and tested one of the boards, fingers finding the weakest place where age and sun had already done their work. She watched him closely, breath held. He did not tear the fence down. He loosened it, pulled free one section, just enough for the space between them to change. Not wide, not dramatic. Just enough for two people to stand on the same ground without crossing into each other's worlds entirely. Wood scraped softly against dirt. A nail fell and lay forgotten. He stepped back and looked at her. "It's not much," he said. "It's enough," she replied. She moved first. Carefully, deliberately, she stepped through the opening. The earth beneath her boots felt different. Not hostile, not welcoming. Simply shared. She stopped when she was close enough to feel the warmth of the forge on her skin. He did not reach for her. That mattered more than anything. For a moment, neither spoke. The land seemed to exhale, the silence easing just slightly, as if relieved by the small shift. "I thought leaving would keep you safe," she said finally, her voice low. "I thought distance would make it easier." He nodded. "It rarely does." She swallowed. "I didn't come back because the danger passed." "I know. I came back because I realized something," she continued. "The walls I built weren't protecting you. They were only trapping me." He studied her face, the lines of exhaustion, the quiet strength beneath it. "And now? Now I'm done pretending I can survive by myself," she said. "I don't want to hide anymore." The forge crackled softly behind him, the sound steady and alive. "Staying won't make things simple," he said, "or safe." "I'm not asking for safe," she replied. "I'm asking for real." He took a breath, slow and measured. "Then this is where we stand," he said, gesturing to the open space between them. "No promises I can't keep. No ground claim that isn't offered." She met his eyes. "That's all I want." They stood there as the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the dirt. No kiss, no embrace. Just two people sharing the same ground for the first time, without fear dictating the distance. From the town, a bell rang faintly. Somewhere farther off, a horse moved through the brush. Life went on, indifferent to the small shift that had just changed everything. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. "I don't know what comes next." He nodded. "Neither do I." That too felt right. As the light faded, he left the forge door open. She stayed beside him. Not inside, not outside, just there. The broken fence cast a short, uneven shadow across the ground, marking a place that had not existed before. It was not a declaration, it was not a victory. It was a quiet agreement, made without witnesses, without ceremony. Two people choosing to stand on the same patch of earth. and for the first time since she had learned to disappear for safety's sake, she felt the truth settle fully into her bones. Some boundaries were meant to be crossed, and some fences were only ever waiting to be opened. There was no wedding, no gathered crowd, no elder's blessing spoken aloud, no promise made in front of witnesses who would remember it later. Life on the frontier rarely paused for such things. What there was instead came quietly, the way all lasting choices did. The fire burned steady, not wild, not roaring, just constant, fed with care, watched with respect. The blacksmith tended it as he always had, but now there were two sets of hands near the hearth. Sometimes she added wood. Sometimes she simply sat close enough to feel the warmth settle into her bones after a long day. Metal bent beneath the hammer, not forced, not shattered, heated, tested, shaped slowly until it held a new form without breaking. She watched him work many evenings, seeing in the iron what he had once described to her at the well, that even the hardest things could change if given time and patience. He watched her too, the way she moved through the land with renewed certainty, the way she no longer scanned the horizon with constant fear, though caution never fully left her, the way she spoke when she chose to speak and stayed silent when silence said more. Water was shared, from the well in the mornings, from a single cup when the day ran long. No one kept count of who drew it or who drank first. It was simply there, like the land itself, necessary, grounding, honest. They did not speak often of what they were. There was no need. Each morning they woke and chose the same thing, to remain, to face the day side by side, whether it brought quiet labor or uncertainty. Some days were easier than others. Some carried echoes of old danger, looks from the town that still lingered too long, distant movement on the hills that reminded them the world had not softened just because they had. But no one asked her to leave. No one demanded he turn her away. The small community that had formed around them held its shape without naming itself. An older woman still brought bread from time to time. Children still wandered near the forge, asking questions about sparks and steel. A lantern still burned in a nearby window on nights when the darkness felt too heavy. Belonging, she learned, did not arrive with celebration. It arrived with consistency. She no longer stood at the edge of things, not because the world had suddenly welcomed her, but because she had stopped stepping back. She claimed her place through presence, through the quiet courage of staying where she had once learned to disappear. The blacksmith no longer lived alone. The forge still woke early. The work still demanded everything from his hands and attention. But when he looked up now, there was someone there who understood the rhythm without needing it explained. Someone who knew when to speak and when to let the fire finish its work. Some evenings they sat outside as the sun fell behind the hills, not touching, not needing to. The fence remained partly broken, the gap unchanged. They never fixed it. It reminded them of the choice they continued to make. They did not talk about forever. Forever was a luxury the frontier rarely allowed. They talked about tomorrow, about the weather, about what needed mending, about where to walk when the heat eased and the land breathed again. And when the night came, quiet, vast, indifferent, they stayed. No one crowned them. No law approved them. No ceremony made them official. But the fire burned. The metal held. The water was shared. Two people no longer alone, choosing each other in the only way that mattered. By not leaving, and in that rare, fragile piece of the wild frontier, where survival often demanded hardness, they found something gentler. Not victory, not triumph. Just a life built slowly, honestly on shared ground. It was enough.